Quick confession before we get into today's episode. 2 episodes ago, episode 3, the personal one where I told you about the watches that made me, I left something out. Or rather, I thought I had told you, and I went back and listened and I hadn't, which is one of those wonderful moments in podcasting where you realize the version of the episode that was in your head or in my head is not the actual version that came out of my mouth. Now, before we get into today's lineup, which is, by the way, a fun lineup, I need to tell you about the watch that I missed. It was my brother's. You'll remember from episode 3, my brother passed away in 2009. 2 years before that, in 2007, before my wedding, he gave me a watch. It was a Gucci, specifically a Gucci G Chrono, 44 millimeters, murdered out, black case, black dial, black bracelet with a perfectly bright green pusher at 4 o'clock. It was quartz. The logo was right there on the dial, and the actual bezel itself was a giant G for Gucci. Gucci. This was on paper a total fashion watch. This was on every list of things a serious watch collector should probably not be wearing, like ever. Yet, this was the single thing that my snobby little 2007 watch nerd self would have said no to. And I loved it. I wore it to meetups. I wore it to birthdays. I wore it to funerals. I wore it on the day I got married. It had a green pusher. I had a green pusher Gucci on my wrist when I said my vows. And then in 2009, my brother was killed. And that watch became the most important watch I owned because every time I looked down on my wrist, there he was. I wore it for 14 years. And in 2023, when my house was broken into, that watch was one of the ones they took. I'll tell you, I learned something from that watch. You don't get to pick the watches that end up mattering most to you. The hobby teaches you that. The watch that means the most is sometimes the one you'd have sworn on paper you'd never buy. My brother knew that before I did. And I bring it up today on episode 5 because today's episode is about fun, about watches that are unapologetically themselves, about watches that don't care what the internet and the watch internet thinks. Watches with personality, with color, with a sense of humor. That Gucci was the first fun watch I had ever owned. And in a strange way, it was the watch that prepared me to fall in love with 3 brands that I want to talk about today. So, with that, let's get into it.
Yeah. My wrist got jokes. No lie, Mr. Jones got a guy in the pool nearby. Rubber duck drifts, this my Monday flex. Big ballroom look, but I'm I by text. Studio Underdog looking like fruit. Cut it in half, got that green uncooked. Zelos got stone from the sky up top. Meteorite shine when the headlights stop. My kids pick the pair like dad. This one, I walk in smug like the paperwork.
Welcome back to What's on Your Restay. I am Wachowski. Today is the gear shift episode. Last episode, I gave you decision psychology and a manifesto about collectors versus speculators. This episode, I think in my head, was the most personal episode I'd ever recorded. And that's not saying much because I've only done less than 5, right? It was both heavy in kind of its own way. And today we're not going to do that. I need a cleanse. I need a palate cleanser. So this is my palate cleansing from some of the heavy stuff. Today, we're talking about watches that I think are fun. 3 brands, all of them in different ways, are operating in part of the hobby that the watch internet sometimes pretends doesn't exist, the playful part. And Moser kind of dips their toes in that, obviously, right? But they still have some pretty high horology stuff. But also, the prices are kind of insane. The part I think that I'm excited about is the joyful part. The part where a brand can put a watermelon on a dial and not be making a joke at any watchmaker's expense, that they can still flip it over and have a mechanical movement, right? That they're making a joke, not necessarily watchmaking, but they're making a joke with watchmaking. And I'm in love with that. The brands we're going to talk about today are Mr. Jones Watches out of London, Studio Underdog with an O as actually a 0 in Underdog. So it's Underdog. Underd0g, yes, with a zero. You say it Underdog, but it's out of Brighton, England. And then Zelos, also known as Zelos. They are Zelos. They're out of Singapore. So let's get into this completely different vibe watch episode. So segment one, Mr. Jones watches. The first watch brand, Mr. Jones, that I want to talk about was founded in 2007 in London by an artist named Crispin Jones. Crispin's cool, by the way. He brings his dog to work. The dude sent me a Christmas card when I bought one of his watches. I mean, who does that, right? And here's the thing, you don't have to understand a whole lot about Crispin, but to understand the brand, you have to understand that he's not a watchmaker. He's a fine artist. And so he has a bachelor's in sculpture from Kingston University. And Crispin, by the way, if I screw up any of this stuff, you give me a heads up, brother. Master's from the Royal College of Art in computer related design. And so he came to watches kind of sideways, right? Through this like art exhibitions. His very first watch design was, and I'm not making this up, it was like a functioning lie detector watch, and this was his entry point into this industry. So when I tell you Mr. Jones watches, that he's making these watches that don't behave like other watches do, this is exactly what I mean. They're not like Submariner homages with a twist. These are watches that completely ask a different question entirely. The question they ask is, what if a watch could be a piece of conceptual art that you wear on your wrist? And so I'm going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about with Mr. Jones, okay? Because I think this is the part that's kind of hard to explain without specifics, and also because I'm talking to you, and so I'm talking about specific art, and you're having to kind of visualize this stuff. So the first one is going to be the kind of the breakout piece, which was called the accurate. On the dial, instead of hour markers, it had two phrases that were rotating in a small window, and one phrase said, remember, right? And the other said, you will die. And the watch was literally kind of this like memento mori, right? It's this Latin for remember, you must die. And it's kind of a reminder that our time is finite. And as these hands are kind of moving around, right? The watch is in effect telling you that you're running out of time, and it's on your wrist, and it's all day and it's every day. And so that watch sold out in days. People got it, right? And then you take the one of my personal favorites, which is it's a watch called A Perfectly Useless Afternoon. It's a dial, kind of a top-down view of a person who's lounging in a pool, and the figure has his legs stretched out, and his leg stretched out is this hour hand. And then there's a tiny rubber duck floating around the dial, and it's a mystery dial, so that you have these layers of like really thin plastic, and they're moving around, and you can't see them again because they've done such a good job with their dust control, that it just looks like this duck is floating around this pool, and the duck is your minute indication. That's it. No numerals, nothing like that. It's beautiful. And so the lines of the pool, they kind of just suggest where the time kind of markers are, and it is on purpose kind of this imprecise watch. A watch not being about precision. And that's, for me, again, perfect. It's a watch that's talking about this perfectly useless afternoon where this person is just lounging in a pool. And a watch about time that isn't about time, that is Mr. Jones' watch. And so there's another one, The Hidden City. It's a London street scene. There's exotic parrots flying by this dial during kind of this daytime. There's intricate time in there. The night is being replaced by a bat, for example, because it's true. When you escape this kind of these pet parrots, they actually thrive and multiplied in these London parks, and you can spot bats at twilight. The watch is kind of this love letter to the London ecology, and that tells you, again, it's telling you time. So this is kind of who Mr. Jones is. It's every single watch is a little idea. It's a little story. Sometimes wry, sometimes kind of morbid, sometimes joyful, always, I think, thoughtful. They release new designs in a limited run, about 100 pieces or so, sometimes more, sometimes less. And the ones that sell out kind of they get added to this permanent collection. No, not always, but again, they kind of run the shop that they want to run. And the watches are made and assembled in their own workshop in London. They actually print in-house. So actually nearly no microbrands can say that. They're using Swiss movements at times. Sometimes they're using seagulls and for jump hours and those kinds of things. Sometimes they're even using Solita automatics. Whatever fits kind of the idea of the design. And so the price point is genuinely, I think, pretty accessible. Most pieces will sit in a couple $100, and it's not like a flex purchase. It's a taste purchase. And the people who get it, they get it. The other reason I love Mr. Jones, and this is something Crispin himself said in interviews, and I'll misquote because, I can't remember everything in the whole world, but I'll do my best. He said something in an interview where He said that he's explicitly not trying to make another Submariner. In his view, everybody has a phone in their pocket. Everybody knows exactly what time it is. So a watch doesn't have to be a primary time telling tool anymore. It can be a piece of art that also happens to tell time. And so this is kind of a wildly liberating idea. Once you accept it, a whole new dimension of watchmaking opens up. Mr. Jones, I think the brand itself teaches me how to think that way. And if you want a watch that's, you know, will stop and make someone ask, like, whoa, whoa, what is that? Mr. Jones, I think, is the answer to that every single time. All right, let's get into segment two. Segment two is Studio Underdog, this kind of irreverent, internet savvy, meeting the energy of just kind of the mad watch scientists, right? Yes, Studio Underdog has a zero in Underdog. So it's spelled the D and then 0G at the end of it. And the story behind that was that Richard Benck, Benc is his last name, trying to come up with this brand name, kept hitting walls because the good kind of like 5-letter neologisms, they were taken. And so he landed on Studio Underdog because in his own words, he was one of the main brand kind of swinging at these like Swiss giants. And so Studio Underdog, this idea that they were doing something different, but instead of having an O in dog, he used a zero, and that came from his kind of understanding of gaming and usernames. So like when you go and you have a really cool name and it's already been taken on that server, in that game, you can't use that name anymore. So what you do is you swap out a letter for a number. And so literally that's the brand origin. And I think it's perfect because it tells you exactly what this brand is about. So Studio Underdog with a zero instead of an O, launched in March of 2020. Yeah, that March of 2020. I don't want to get into that whole COVID thing, but yeah. So out of Brighton, England, Bank had been working as a product designer, and this is kind of insane too. He was a product designer for Braun, Braun, for 6 years. Now, Braun, it's a German design house, and it's famous for extremely strict, disciplined Bauhaus design. Minimalism to the max on the planet, right? Black dials, white dials, and if they're feeling a little frisky, maybe they'll throw in some gray. That's about it. And so that was the sandbox that Richard was working in, right? And you think about what he's putting out now. Now, if you haven't, you can pause me or you can go look it up later on, but look up Studio Underdog watches and you'll see what I'm talking about. You're like, that dude worked at that place? So when COVID hit, he was kind of stuck at home with his thoughts and he built a brand that was exactly the opposite of everything that he'd been trained to do. Watercolor dials, loud color gradients, watches that look, and I'll say this with love, like a kid drew them. And I think it's beautiful. And so I think this is interesting as well. We always talk about in academia, for example, becoming a professor, becoming a teacher, or whatever. Sometimes the students that become the best instructors are the ones that have had the worst instructors because they go, I will do the opposite of what I saw. That person made me feel this way, so I'm gonna teach a different way. I'm gonna lecture a different way. And so I think it's interesting that I think even though I've never met Richard, I think him and I have this connection to one another. I think when you go through shared trauma, I think that's kind of what that looks like as well sometimes. So, okay, so here's what I think is interesting. When we talk about Studio Underdog, I believe it's brilliant. Underneath the playful exterior is a rigorously designed watch. The Bauhaus, the kind of the Bauhaus design, I don't think the discipline ever left. The proportions are right, the hands are right, the text on the dial is laid out has this kind of obsessive care that you'd find from somebody who did spend over half a decade at Braun. And so the brand signature is offset specifically so that it stays visible no matter where the chronograph hand is sweeping. So again, if you have your chronograph and it gets snapped back to 12, that usually cuts your logo, your brand, right in half, right? But this doesn't do that. Instead, he's offset the branding so that you can actually see the name. Now, the movement in there is a Siegel ST1901. That's Chinese hand-wound column wheel chronograph. It was originally developed and kind of based on the Venus 175. That's an architecture from like the 1940s. It's a solid movement. They're relatively reliable, but you can occasionally run into a Siegel 1963, kind of the same family of those powered ones that you can kind of run into. The 1901, from my experience, has been more reliable than the 1963. Again, it's a serious vintage chronograph that nerds know about, and it's a good movement. It's hand wound, again, column wheel. You have real horological credibility under what This is a silly kind of watermelon dial. So let's talk about the watermelon. Again, watermelon MEL0N. So pink and green gradient dial, watermelon seed shaped hour markers, and it's like the whole 9 yards. It came out of the watch internet, and the watch internet kind of split itself in half. And I think for me, that's design wise is exactly where you want to be. You want people who genuinely hate your designs, because what ends up happening is you have this divide, and then you have a group of people who go, that is brilliant. And so you don't want everyone to, you're not going to design a watch that everyone's going to like, because essentially what you get is this boring watch. And so, yeah, it split the watch internet in half. The comments were like, this is the dumbest watch I've ever seen. Why would anyone spend money on this? And then the other half was like, I need this watch immediately. I'm going to set my alarm clock. And when this thing releases, I will be credit card in hand, whatever, PayPal, let's roll, right? And you can guess which half won. The brand released their release window, and this is documented. It generated nearly 6,000 orders worth around 3.5 million pounds in 9 hours for a watch that didn't exist, with their first physical production just 4 years earlier. Now, this is insane. Now, since then, watermelon, mint choco chip, strawberries and cream, pizza, yeah, pizza, cherry pie, desert sky, and then a goofy panda. They've all released this kind of flavor or vibe and expressed something that was beautifully gradient. And it was on top of this kind of properly engineered chronograph. And so here's the detail that I love. When Chinese factories started producing knockoffs of Studio Underdog designs, because you know this, right? You go to AliExpress or whatever, and they will copy, essentially exact copy, to almost to the point where they're putting the text in the same location and stuff. They copied Studio Underdog's designs, and they changed the name. Obviously, they didn't say Studio on the dials, but they put their own name on it. And Ben didn't sue them. He didn't even lawyer up. He instead did something that an artist would do, right? He created two new colorways that were inspired by the fakes. So what he did was he turned these folks that were counterfeiting into these design collaborators, and it was genius. And that's the kind of confidence, and I think almost the humor, and I still think about it, it still makes me laugh, that defines a brand. The thesis Bank had, and he talked about this, and I'll try to paraphrase the best I can. I hope I do it justice. If you let the market drive what you make, you end up making another Submariner homage, and he doesn't want to do that. He makes what he thinks is fun, and it turns out thousands of people agree. And the price point sits around anywhere between $500 to $1,000. It can go up depending on the caliber of movement that you get. Hand wound, again, mechanical chronographs with a Bauhaus trained designer attention to all of this detail on the dial that makes you smile every single time you see it. One of the greatest deals, I think, in modern watchmaking. And it was one of those watches that I think some, YouTubers, for example, would say, this thing's going to burn out, it's going to fizzle out, blah, blah. And instead, it's like they keep stepping up to the plate and they keep hitting home runs. And it's an interesting case study in this entire space. And I'm fascinated and I think I'm blessed to be able to just be able to witness this stuff as well. And then be able to handle their watches, because they're awesome. Again, the tricky part is sometimes catching one. They sell out sometimes now in seconds. So you have to be on an email list and that kind of stuff. But again, part of those releases and part of being quick, and that's kind of, I think, part of the fun as well, is being able to be aware of that. Now, Richard understood that. And so what he did was there was moments where, say, for example, you missed a drop. He will open up a purchase window and say, hey, we got your email. We noticed that you had expressed interest, but you didn't purchase one this time, or you missed a window or whatever. But if you'd like to order one, we'll build you one custom order. And then here's a link to that and kind of stuff. And you have, a couple of days or whatever to purchase. Segment 3, let's get into Zelos. Now, the brand Zelos, Zelos, is actually pronounced Zelos. Most people will pronounce it, and I pronounce it Zelos. And that's fine. But the founder, to my understanding, he kind of uses the Greek pronunciation again, which is Zelos, like pronounced Zayloss. It's named after this Greek deity of zeal and competition. And founded in 2014, I believe, by Elshan Tang, and Elshan is Elshan. And again, he was a watch collector and kind of a trader from like age 15. He studied mechanical engineering at, I think it was the National University of Singapore. And somebody will correct me if I get that wrong, but I believe he was at National University of Singapore. And then he He decided that trading the same brands and the same designs over and over and over was getting boring. And so he made his own brand. And here's kind of what makes Zelos special. Zelos is more than any brand I can think of right now. They're a materials lab. Other brands chase kind of vintage homages, other brands chase trends. I think Zelos chases materials. They're I think structurally the brand kind of asks themselves on a regular basis, well, what if we made a watch out of this? And so, bronze cases, they kind of developed their own patina over years, and Zelos has used bronze. And now it's way more in the kind of the mainstream of using bronze. Zelos was using it a long time ago. And you'll see this kind of unique wear when you wear bronze. Your skin, the things that you put the bronze in. I know I have bronze watches and I've worn them, on vacations and trips. And by going into chemically treated pools at resorts and then going into the ocean and stuff, you'll get completely different changing metals, right? And so your skin's chemistry and that kind of stuff will change the metal over time. Obviously, like Damascus steel, and you're thinking about Damascus, like when you see like a sword or a knife or things like that, right? This ancient forging technique where multiple layers of steel, they're folded and twisted and folded and twisted and hammered and heated. And it kind of creates this kind of beautiful wood grain pattern. So no two Damascus cases are going to look alike, and they're kind of literally one of a kind objects. And then he's like, well, that's cool that you can do that with, you know, steel and folding that, but what if we did it with like titanium? And so they've got Timascus, right? Which is essentially the same concept, but made with titanium. So it's a material, to my knowledge, Zelos was actually using first in watchmaking. And it's titanium, it's treated and forged, but in this Damascus pattern. And so what you get is this beautiful kind of organic swirl of titanium colors. Now, when you do that with titanium, what you get are these iridescent blues and purples and golds, and I don't think it looks like anything else on the market. And then they were like, you know what? Let's use forged carbon. Let's throw some meteorite dials in there, like actual meteorite that they sliced in, put on a watch face, aventurine, teak wood, and then they used submarine steel, not submariner, submarine, as in like salvaged steel from decommissioned submarines. And so if it's a strange and I think beautiful material, Zelos is probably going to put it on or in a watch. And the watches themselves, I have to be clear about this. They're legit. They're not like these kind of, more toyish. You can throw them around. You can take them diving. They're not gimmicks. These are dive watches, and some of them are dive watches. Other ones are more like daily drivers. They'll have real water resistance. You can run in and get 300 meters or more on the Hammerhead or the Mako lines. Some of them are, hitting pieces that are getting 1,000 meters of water resistance. The movements are typically Miyota on kind of the entry level ones, and then you'll get into like some Seiko sometimes. And then there's Solita, sometimes there's ETA, but then occasionally you'll find them, they'll experiment with movements as well. They'll go find a Lejeune Perret on the high end pieces, or they'll find a small stockpile of movements that are new old stock, and they'll take them and tinker with them and then make up different watches with those movements. And so it's fascinating. Now, the last part I think people forget is that these watches are well finished. They iterate. And so every single time they release these new watches, they're better than the last generation. The bezel action I think are crisp. The loom is spectacular. So Zelos is famous for going kind of overboard in their loom, and it kind of makes watches glow in the dark for hours. And I know this firsthand because we've had three infants and newborns in our house over the last 6 years or so, and I had a Zelos, Hammerhead, a Mako, and a Swordfish, all at different times. And I never learned my lesson. I will wear that watch during the daytime. I will put it on my nightstand at night, and it will literally glow and make the room super, super bright. And my wife is like, you have to cover that. The baby is not sleeping. I can't. It looks like there's a torch, a light, just something emanating from your nightstand. So please flip it over, turn it off somehow, whatever, right? It's not like an Indiglo or Timex where I can push a button. So I'm flipping the watch over, I'm putting it in a drawer or whatever because it's so bright. So just be aware that glow can glow for hours. And if you're a light sleeper, maybe it's not on your nightstand. Flagships for the line, there's the Hammerhead. It's kind of like a tank, like cushion case diver. It's basically this watch that kind of, I think, put them on the map. There's the Mako. It's Mako. It's a thinner, cleaner, I think, more wearable diver. There's the Swordfish, which is a slightly sportier diver. Typically, they will have, ceramic bezels. A Spearfish. There's an Aurora Field. They just have a variety of GMTs, chronographs. I believe that they're experimenting with tourbillons. Their pricing is part of the part that I think is suspicious. You can get a bronze diver with a meteorite dial for like under $1,000. You can also just get a really solid watch for like $300. And so it's just kind of insane when you start to think about what they're doing. And then you're like, well, this watch has an adjustable clasp. It's beautiful. It works really well. It's finished well. Everything fits nicely. The watch keeps great time, and it was $300. I'm confused, right? How did this happen? And so, a lot of times, I think what ends up happening is I think Elshan is building the watches that I think he wants, which is really great. Okay, so when we talk about this, these bronze divers, we talk about Damascus or Damascus pieces. You're looking at maybe 12 to $1,500. And it's kind of this materials big brand reserved for what I would think would be $10,000 pieces. So Zelos is putting on these kind of like almost like a spectacle. He's going to throw this stuff out. Maybe you get it for $500 as opposed to 5,000. So how does he do this? I don't know the inner workings of his business, but I would say that direct to consumer is going to help. I think limited runs help. I think no middleman helps. I think being designed by a single person, Elshan, who is by all accounts, kind of this like obsessive watch person, is just building watches that I think he wants to own and then giving us the opportunity to have a couple of them. I think the fact that every release is limited, so some pieces will sell out in minutes, is awesome. Other people hate that. They hate the idea that something has come up. They don't get a chance to try it on, and so they don't like this sort of limited run. But I think as a business owner, especially when you're competing with so many other brands, I think for me, I think it's a smart business model. Now, the collectors in this space, they've gotten pretty serious. There's a real secondary market for these desirable Zelos models, Zelos, especially the ones that are kind of discontinued or in these kind of rare case materials. And so they hold value pretty well. Um, if you ever want to wear a watch, I think that no one else on the planet has and has a story that has material that you can talk about, I think Zelos is kind of the best play in the entire microbrand space. Now, fair warning that they are an absolute gateway drug to the more exotic side of this hobby. Okay. Now, let's bring this thing together. Segment 4. 3 brands that were completely different vibes, right? We talked about Mr. Jones, conceptual art on the wrist, London made, kind of the brand for people who want their watch to mean something beyond just time. You got Studio Underdog, this Bauhaus discipline meets like watercolor joy, right? The brand that I think people who want their watch to kind of make them smile, right? It's the one that when, the watermelon was in my watch box in pretty heavy rotation, my kids would always pick the watch, pick the watermelon watch, pick the watermelon watch. They love playing with the pushers, they love the idea of the watermelon. And then Zelos, you get this materials experiment at prices that I think shouldn't be possible. The brand is really for people who want their watches to be a one of one object. So what do all 3 of these watches and these watch brands have in common? They have personality and they're fun. They are not watches that are trying to look like other watches. I think these watches have a clear, confident, distinct point of view. You see one on wrist and you kind of know exactly the kind of person that's wearing that watch. And I don't like to judge a book by its cover, but if a dude's wearing a Mr. Jones, I'm going to go talk to that guy. If he's wearing a Studio Underdog, I want to talk to him. If he's wearing a Zelos, I want to talk. Brings me back to my brother's Gucci, the watch. That ridiculous black and green fashion watch from 2007 was the watch I needed before I knew I needed it, because it taught me before I had the language for it that the most important thing a watch can do is just be itself. A Gucci G Chrono is not pretending to be a Patek. A Mr. Jones watch is not pretending to be a Rolex. A Studio Underdog is not pretending to be vintage. A Zelos is not pretending to be Swiss heritage. They are themselves, and that's awesome. And the more you wear watches that are themselves, the more comfortable you get at being yourself. And the whole arc of this hobby, the whole arc right there, I think, is that these watches help you, or at least they've helped me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing here. They've helped me become more comfortable with what I wear on my wrist and not caring what other people think. My brother gave me that lesson, and he gave me that lesson before anything else. And I think about him every time I look at a watch and I ask myself, is this you, Restay, or is this someone who told you it was going to be you? This would look great on your wrist, blah, 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 right? That question, by the way, I think is going to save you and it saved me a lot of money. And in the end, I think you get more interesting watches. So I want to leave you with that. Now, next episode, which is going to be what's next in section. So this is segment 5, which is just the next part. Next episode, we're going to be talking about vintage. I know I've teased it once already and kind of pivoted away. I wasn't ready for it yet. There's a lot of vintage folks that are going to just absolutely skewer me next episode. So it is what it is. But now we're going to get there. After these, episodes of independence and contemporary watchmaking and just some pure fun, we're going to take a time machine back. I think we're going to go and talk about vintage and what it actually means. And I am no expert in vintage. By all means, trust me, you could throw a rock in a watch meetup and you could find 15 people that were more experienced and educated. And I'm going to give you some examples of where I've screwed up pretty royally in the vintage world. But we're going to talk about how to buy, or at least how I've bought vintage, and how I've lost my mind, I've lost my money, and how your watch, when it shows up to your door, full of sand, we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about honest patina versus suspicious patina. We will talk about Franken watches, and I want to talk a little bit about the references of, collectors and kind of what they should know, even if they never plan on buying one. Now, we're also going to talk a little bit about trusted dealers and forums and all that kind of stuff. And then finally, I think the practical part of the episode is, how do we do all this stuff? So that's coming up next. I'm excited that you are here and that you're continuing to listen to me. And then finally, just a quick favor, if any of these 3 brands that I talked about today made you go, oh, I need to look that up, that's the whole point. So go look them up. Tell me what you think. Find me online. Tell me which of these 3 brands or any of the brands spoke to you. I want to hear it. If you have fun in your watch collecting, I think that's kind of the whole point. A watch that nobody serious will call serious. I think that's also pretty fun. A watch that makes you smile every day, that you want to put on. A watch that you are in love with in spite and because of that. So tell me about it. That's the whole conversation I want to have. Send me a picture, send me a story. The Gucci-shaped hole in my collection lives forever. Tell me about yours. I'm Wachowski. Take care of yourselves and wear something good.
Yeah. My wrist got jokes. No lie, Mr. Jones got a guy in the pool nearby. Rubber duck drifts, this my Monday flex. Big boardroom look, but I'm eye by text. Studio Underdog looking like fruit. Cut it in half, got that green uncooked. Zelos got stone from the sky up top. Meteorite shine when the headlights stop. My kids pick the pair like dad, this one. I walk in smug like the paperwork one. Tie on neat, but the dial goes wild. Business face on, but my face got style. They ask if I'm serious, I say dead ass. Then I flash that duck like a punchline pass. I don't do plain, I don't do tame. Every watch on my arm says a different name. Hands on the glass, let them stare. They can't guess what I wear. Little ones laugh, then I let them choose. A grown man's fit with a kid-proof move. Silly watches, my whole estate mischievous. Silly watches, business suit, but the dial's delirious. Avocado on dial, duck in the pool. Silly watches, and I wear them cool. And I wear them cool. Yeah, that watermelon face got me grinning hard, like I peeled summer and strapped my arm. Meteor rock, that space on skin. Old earth history, I let it spin. I keep it high when the meeting drags. Cuff check clean, but the flavor brags. Kids in the hallway pick the blue, no red. They got more taste than the boardroom heads. One day duck, next day stone, next day fruit. When I'm on that phone, I see men flex with gold all day. I'd rather wear weird in the sharpest way. Cause if my wrist got a little bit of fun, then the whole damn week feels less like work undone. Yeah, I'm the guy with the poolside grin and the rock from outer space on my skin. Let them laugh, let them point. I built my life on a strange joy joint. Little hands choose, I don't complain. That's how I keep my grown man name. Silly watches, my whole estate mischievous. Silly watches, business suit, but the dial's delirious. Avocado on dial, duck in the pool. Silly watches. I'm cool. Where I'm cool. Mr. Jones, watermelon stone from the stars. My kids run the lineup, they know who we are. Avocado on dial. I'm good in the room. If it looks a little goofy, that means it's my tune.